saltwater superhero diver Ed, captain of the Starfish Enterprise. A mission will be launched on Sunday, September 14th, leaving the Northeast Harbor Town Dock at 1:30 in the afternoon. On board the Starfish Enterprise for about 2 hours of historic rectification and scenic rubbernecking with the Boat Talk guys, the media, the Mount Desert Historical Society, and Cherry Garcia. Details of the mission can be seen at our website, weru.org, and people who can't make the cruise can still participate. Just check out weru.org or boattalk.org for all the details. Tickets can be had by calling WERU during regular business hours at 469-6600. Just another example of how community radio WERU-FM Blue Hill is protecting our heritage by member donation.
Support for WERU comes from Maine Farmland Trust, a member-supported, non-profit organization focused on reviving the working landscape and securing a future for farming in Maine. More information on protecting farmland and supporting farmers at mainfarmlandtrust.org.
Time is 1 minute past 10 o'clock. This is Community Radio, WERU-FM, 89.9 Blue Hill, 99.9 in Bangor, and streaming worldwide at weru.org. Stay tuned for Common Ground.
Good morning, and welcome to Common Ground Radio, an hour-long discussion of local food and agriculture here in the state of Maine, brought to you by the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. My name is CJ Walke, and I am your host for today's show. Common Ground Radio is a monthly show airing on the first Friday of every month at 10 a.m. here on WERU. We are open to suggestions on future topics and guests for the show, so please feel free to contact us with your thoughts and ideas through our website, www.mofca.org. For today's show, we will be discussing the use of antibiotics in livestock production and its effects on livestock and human health. Antibiotic resistance is becoming a major concern in national and global discussions of human health and the future of healthcare across the world. Research shows that 80% of antibiotics sold in the United States are used in animal production. Most of this use is on confinement farms and feedlots where livestock receive non-therapeutic doses of antibiotics to boost growth and prevent health issues that arise in crowded conditions. This widespread use of antibiotics in livestock production is contributing significantly to the increase in bacterial resistance to antibiotics, not only in animals, but also in humans. This bacterial resistance often confounds the ability of healthcare providers to help their patients. According to the Center for Disease Control, there were an estimated 722,000 healthcare-associated infections, referred to as HAIs, in U.S. acute care hospitals in 2011. About 75,000 hospital patients with HAIs died during their hospitalizations. The National Academy of Sciences reported that a decrease in antimicrobial use in human medicine alone will have little effect on the current situation. Substantial efforts must be made to decrease inappropriate overuse in animals and agriculture as well. The Food and Drug Administration recently issued voluntary guidelines for livestock producers focusing on non-therapeutic uses. So moving on to the show, I have a couple guests here in the studio with me today, and we have a guest on the phone. But before we get to those introductions and discussions, I'd like to make listeners aware of a few upcoming food and farming-related events that they may find of interest here in our community. So tomorrow, September 6th at 4 p.m. in the Blue Hill Library, there is a free presentation on Seed Saving 101 and the Scatter Seed Project presented by the Deer Isle Hostel. On September 9th, the Mofca Farm Training Project workshop on seed saving is occurring. And it seems to be that time of year to think about saving seeds. And that begins at 5 p.m. at Seven Tree Farm in Vassalboro. Then later this month, the State Board of Pesticide Control is organizing a free disposal of banned or unusable pesticides. This is a free disposal program open to homeowners, family-owned farms, and greenhouses, and collection sites will be in Presque Isle, Bangor, Augusta, and Portland. You do need to pre-register for this program, and the registration deadline is September 26th. For more information, you can go to the Board of Pesticide Control website, which can be more easily found by searching for the Maine Board of Pesticide Control rather than me trying to give out the full website URL here, or you may call area code 207-287-2731. And lastly, on September 19th through the 21st in lovely Unity, Maine, is the 38th Annual Common Ground Country Fair, where gates open at 9 a.m. each day. And I had a couple notes here from the fair office to pass along as information to listeners, that there will be construction on the road through Benton, and the recommendations are to take alternate routes 137 through Winslow, and then Route 202/Route 9 that goes into Unity. There's also information about a change in ticket price for this year, and for more information on that, please feel free to go to the MOFGA website at mofga.org or give a call into the office at 568-4142. So, now we get into the topic for today's show and get that business out of the way. I have a few guests with me here on the show, like I said, and I'd like to give an introduction of each, and then we'll go back around and they can tell a little bit more about the work that they do and how it relates to the topic for today's show. So Don Hoenig is here with me in the studio, and Don was Maine State Veterinarian for most of his career, overseeing all livestock and poultry health, especially diseases relating to human health. His work integrated animal health, public health, and environmental stewardship. Dr. Hoenig, now retired from the state veterinarian post, works part-time as an extension veterinarian with the University of Maine and continues to consult with Maine farmers and raise public awareness of problems associated with overuse of antibiotics in livestock. He also served as an American Veterinary Medical Association Congressional Fellow in the office of Senator Susan Collins, and now serves as the Chief Veterinary Advisor for the American Humane Association's Humane Heartland program. Thanks for being here, Don.
You're welcome.
Also in the studio, we have Paul Volckhausen. Paul and his wife Karen own and operate Happy Town Farm here in Orland, Maine. Paul has been a MOFGA certified organic farmer for over 25 years and has been deeply involved in the organic farming movement here in Maine, as well as international efforts toward farmer solidarity through social and economic justice as a member of the MOFGA El Salvador Sistering Project. So thanks for being here, Paul.
You're welcome.
And we also have on the phone with us today is Jennifer Obadia. Jen is a New England coordinator for the Healthy Food and Healthcare program of the Global Coalition Healthcare Without Harm. Jen conducts research with Farm to Institution New England and is adjunct faculty at the Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy. She has over 10 years of experience in community-based education and food access programs. She has conducted research on the Healthy Corner store and managed the Boston Bounty Bucks Farmers Market Incentive Program. A major initiative of Healthcare Without Harm is reduction of antibiotic use in animal agriculture. So thank you for being with us here today, Jen.
Thank you.
Okay. And even though I've given a brief kind of overview of the background of our guests here today, I would like to circle back around and give each of you the chance to kind of introduce the work that you do and how it relates to the topic for today's show, and kind of flesh out a little bit more than what I just kind of read here from my notes. So Jen, would you like to take the opportunity to go first and tell us a little bit more about the Healthy Food and Healthcare program and Healthcare Without Harm?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on the show, CJ. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Sure.
So Healthcare Without Harm, like you mentioned, is a global coalition. It's an environmental health organization that works to leverage the role of hospitals to improve both environmental conditions and public health around the globe. And like you mentioned, here in the United States, we have a program that's called Healthy Food and Healthcare, and that really focuses on improving the nutrition and the sustainability of food that's purchased by hospitals around the country. And our main campaign right now is around antibiotics in agriculture, and specifically working with hospitals to switch their meat procurement practices to sources raised without the routine use of antibiotics. So we work with hospitals all around the country, including hospitals here in Maine. In fact, we were over at Maine General yesterday, learning some more about the great work that they're doing in reducing the meat raised with antibiotics that they're purchasing, and with other hospitals across the state. And really, our campaign has sort of two approaches. We work on procurement strategies, and then we also work on policy. So from the procurement angle, we work directly with hospitals to help connect them with sources of beef, chicken, pork products that are raised without the routine use of antibiotics. And then we're also working at the national level with a group of organizations like Real Food Challenge that works with colleges, and School Food Focus, who works with K through 12 public schools, to really leverage our collective voice as institutions that are saying, we serve our youth, we serve the sick, and we want to make sure that we're providing them with the healthiest, most sustainable options out there, and make sure that we're, preserving the use of antibiotics to protect public health. And then from the policy perspective, there are a couple of pieces of legislation that has been introduced, although unfortunately they've stalled out both in the House and the Senate, but have been introduced, one of which is co-signed by Maine's own Susan Collins, to preserve the use of antibiotics for medical treatment and to reduce its use in animal agriculture. So we're really trying to work on this angle on this issue from all different angles.
Okay, that's great, Jen. Thank you. Thanks again for being here. And now I'll turn to Paul Volckhausen. Paul, if you could just tell a little bit about your farm and maybe your history farming in Maine.
Sure, thank you. With my wife, Karen, we, as CJ said, we own and operate Happy Town Farm. It's a diversified, certified organic farm. We raise vegetables and flowers. That's a major part of our operation, but we also have sheep and poultry that are certified organic, and then pigs that are not. I've been involved with MOFCA since almost the very beginning, and MOFCA has been very supportive of me and my farming education and success or lack of, and so I'm happy to be here today.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. And Dawn, you want to tell us a little bit about kind of your background?
Sure. As you said, I was a state veterinarian for many years and retired in 2012 to do a fellowship in D.C. and actually worked on this bill that Jen referred to, the Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act, when I was in Senator Collins' office. And then since I've come back here, I've been working for Extension part-time out in the field, doing some work with farmers on health issues and quality assurance and so forth, and also been involved with the American Humane Association Farm Animal Welfare Program. So this is a topic that's been of great interest to me for probably 8 or 10 years. And so I'm happy to be here. Been listening to this station since its inception, and I'm also a MOFCA member. I've been a MOFCA member for many years. Do you think it might be useful to just tell a little bit about how antibiotics are used in animals at this point?
Yeah, it would be
CJ?
good to, I think maybe a little bit of, touch on a bit just kind of the history.
Sure.
I can't imagine it's been in practice for centuries, but also
Sure.
really how is it used? And I know that there are some different methods.
Yep. Well, I think the antibiotics go back to the 40s, and a lot of people know of Alexander Fleming, who basically discovered penicillin and then received a Nobel Prize along with two others in 1945 for that discovery. And penicillin had a big role, I think, from what I read in World War II, in preventing a lot of infections and saving a lot of lives of soldiers. And so an antibiotic is a chemical substance produced by a microorganism capable of inhibiting the growth or killing other microorganisms, in a nutshell. Antibiotics are either produced naturally or synthetically. So since the 40s, there's been an antibiotic revolution that has saved a lot of lives. Antibiotics are used in farm animals generally to treat bacterial infections, as they are in humans. And you can obtain antibiotics for animals in one of three ways: either over the counter, which you can just go and buy them, prescription, where you need a veterinarian to write a prescription, or what's called a veterinary feed directive, which is similar to a prescription. They're used in different ways in animals, either therapeutically, and under therapeutic, we have either treatment, prevention, or control. So that's therapeutic. So you could treat a condition such as pneumonia or skin infection caused by a bacteria. You could prevent a disease such as diarrhea in baby chicks or mastitis in dairy cows. Or you can control a disease such as a disease called shipping fever in a group of cattle that are going to be transported a long ways. So that's therapeutic: treatment, prevention, control. Then what you started talking about was another category called non-therapeutic, or what some people also refer to as production use. And those drugs are approved for feed efficiency or growth promotion by the FDA. And non-therapeutic use of antibiotics in feed or water is most common in chickens raised for meat, broilers, turkeys, in swine, and in some beef feedlots. And although the exact mechanism of feed efficiency growth promotion isn't really totally understood, it's thought that some of these antibiotics help boost growth in these animals by eliminating some harmful bacteria from the animal's gut. So, but one thing that's important to remember is that since 1993, all antibiotics that have been approved for use in food-producing animals have required a prescription or veterinary feed directive. The non-therapeutic drugs that we're going to talk about, or the feed efficiency growth promotion drugs, are over the counter, and they have been over the counter since they were a lot of them were approved in the 60s and 70s, and I've actually done some searching for it, and it's hard to find online when they were approved. But they've been approved, they've been used, and there's a major change in policy that we can talk about a little bit that's come about in December of 2013 on part of the FDA. So maybe I'll stop there. I've been talking too much. So.
No. This is all about talking here and discussion today.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of the background kind of on the animal livestock side, but Jen, I wanted to ask you a little bit of, if we're thinking about antibiotic use kind of starting in the 1940s or so, do you have an idea of kind of when issues in human healthcare to resistance building up in different bacterial diseases started to show itself, or when really that red flag popped up saying, hold on, something needs to be changed here?
Yeah, I don't have an exact date for you, but, like the doctor was just mentioning, antibiotic use as well as in animals and human health really did start to come about around World War II, and really was responsible for saving a lot of lives at that time. And, its use has continued to increase, both in animals as well as in human health. And so really, I think it's probably over maybe, let's say, the last 15 years or so that the conversation is evolving around concerns that this overuse of antibiotics is starting to lead to this development of resistant strands of bacteria. And so really what what we're concerned about is it's about 8 different classes of antibiotics that are currently used in both animal and human health, and looking to protect those strands or those classes of antibiotics to be reserved for human health. There are other types of other types of antibiotics that are used specifically in animal agriculture that are not quite as important for human health. So it's really those antibiotics that cover both categories, both animals and humans, that we're looking to protect and to have taken out of that non-therapeutic category, so that they're not included in feed and not used as growth promotants.
Okay. All right. And then, Paul, I wanted to ask you just a little bit, having been certified organic farmer for a while, pre the 2002 kind of switch over to USDA. And I was wondering, say, in the early days with MOFGA certification, what was the original view on antibiotic use?
Well, I think organic farmers have always been concerned about antibiotic use in animals and wanted to reduce that to the lowest level possible.
Yep.
We're also concerned about our animals' health, so if antibiotics are needed for health, we want to be able to use them.
Mm-hmm.
When MOFGA used to run the certification program before the National Organic Program came in, we would allow an animal to be treated with antibiotics if it was needed and recommended by a veterinarian, and then we had to use twice the withdrawal period that the label required, and we felt that was safe, so there'd be no chance of an antibiotic residue in the meat.
Mm-hmm.
When the National Organic Program came into effect, it basically said that any animal that's going to be sold for meat as organic cannot be treated with antibiotics. So if you have an animal that needs antibiotics, you have to withdraw that from the organic certification program. And there are very few situations over the 25 years we've been raising organic animals that we've needed antibiotics, but there are times. The most common for us has been attacks by dogs, where a dog attacks a sheep and
mm-hmm.
Damages it severely, and you really need to treat it with antibiotics to save its life. And the other is when you've had to intervene in a birthing situation,
mm-hmm.
and you want to prevent infection. But other than that, we haven't had to use antibiotics for anything else, and so most of our animals can be certified organic, even if ewes that are 7 or 8 years old when they're done producing.
Yep. Okay, all right. I just want to take a minute to remind listeners that you are listening to Common Ground Radio, an hour-long discussion of local food and agriculture here in Maine, brought to you by the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. And today we are talking about the use of antibiotics in livestock production. And here in the studio with me, we have Don Hoenig, who was the Maine state veterinarian for the majority of his career, and Jennifer Obadia from Healthy Food and Healthcare Program, working with Healthcare Without Harm, and Paul Volckhausen from Happy Town Farm, right down the road here in Orland, Maine. We'll be looking to open up the phone lines very soon here, so if any listeners want to call in with any questions for our guests or comments on the topic, you are more than welcome to do so. And that phone number that you would need to call is toll-free at 1-866-625-9378. And I'll say it once more, 1-866-625-9378. We always enjoy the phone calls here. So, Dawn, I wanted to ask you, now that we kind of have a little bit of the history and the background, I was just kind of curious about, it seems like the initial use for antibiotics was really focused on human health, and then somewhere there must have been the switch where, sure, it could work for animal bacterial diseases also, But then where in the livestock meat production, dairy production world was it realized that somehow this is going to also help boost production or feed efficiency or growth rates?
I assume it was someplace back in the 1950s or 60s when somebody added antibiotics to feed for either a number of species and noticed that there were better growth rates. And then during that time, the FDA approval process for antibiotics was not as stringent as it is now, so a lot of these antibiotics got approved for use under this feed efficiency growth promotion classification. But I think one thing it would be helpful for listeners to know is that situation, after many years of controversy, is changing now. And a very, very significant change on the part of the FDA is a proposal that they put out in December of 2013 to, over the course of 3 years, remove growth promotion and feed efficiency claims for these drugs that are administered in feed and water to livestock and poultry. And secondly, to impose some sort of veterinary oversight. As I said earlier, currently these feed efficiency growth promotion antibiotics are over the counter, so they do not require veterinarian involvement. So they're doing two things. They've said that the feed efficiency growth promotion use is what they call injudicious. They made that statement a couple of years ago, and they also made the statement that they need to see more veterinary involvement. So it's going to be a voluntary compliance policy guide on the part of the FDA over 3 years. And when they announced this in December of 2013, they gave the drug companies 90 days to declare their intentions. So by March, they had heard from 25 of 26 drug companies who manufacture these antibiotics that they would comply, and then within a month or two, the 26th company said that they would comply. So now the 26 out of 26 companies that produce these antibiotics for in the feed administration in the feed and water for feed efficiency growth promotion have said that they will remove those claims, and then they'll need to reapply to the FDA for some sort of therapeutic approval, either disease treatment, disease prevention, or disease control, and the FDA will require veterinary involvement. They haven't said yet whether they're going to actually require a veterinary prescription or what's called the veterinary feed directive. I think they're heading in the direction of veterinary feed directive. So in my mind, this has been long overdue in coming. Not everybody in our profession agrees with that, but I think that it is a step in the right direction towards better control over the use of antibiotics in farm animals and towards having more involvement of veterinarians.
Okay.
Yeah, and can I just add a quick point there?
Absolutely, Jen.
I agree with Don that this is a step that we've been waiting for from the FDA for quite some time, and we're very excited that they have asked the pharmaceutical companies to remove the claim that these antibiotics can be used as growth promotants, and that the pharmaceutical companies have decided to do that voluntarily. I think what we're really hoping from FDA is, like Don mentioned, they're saying that there should be some sort of veterinary oversight, and so we're really looking to them to provide more clear guidance on what that looks like. So we really look forward to hearing how they roll that out and how they clarify that guidance, and to having conversations with them about what that needs to look like to make sure that these antibiotics are used in the most judicious way possible.
Okay.
And actually, on the note of positive steps that have happened along these lines, we actually just got good news yesterday. Purdue put out a press release saying that they were no longer going to be using antibiotics in their hatcheries, which is pretty exciting that such a large mainstream chicken producing company is really taking this on and largely removing antibiotics from their production. So that's an exciting step forward, and we really hope that other companies will see this as a sign that, this is really what's important for human health, for animal health, and that this is what the market is really starting to demand, and that we'll start to see a shift more broadly.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was really good news, too, as Jen said, that when a company like Purdue, which is a major player in the marketplace, comes out and says something like that, then it also tends to put the pressure on other producers in the marketplace to think about doing something similar. So I tend to be an optimist on a lot of things, and on this, I think we're heading in the right direction. And it may not be as fast as some people would like to see, but making change on this type of an issue is extremely difficult, but it's been coming for a long time, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask, just to get some clarity on those uses, we talked about the therapeutic and the non-therapeutic. So I'm just wondering, Paul, as a farmer, is this something, say, is there an antibiotic, maybe penicillin? Is it something that is maybe on hand as just in case? Because I'm sure if infection strikes, what's the access to something like that over the counter?
For us, we go through our veterinarian. If we have an injury or a situation where we think we might need it for therapeutic uses, we go to the vet and get it. The antibiotics have an expiration date, and if it sits in the refrigerator for too long, it's not any good anymore anyway. Mm-hmm. And so we get it from the vet and follow the prescribed doses and administration.
It may be getting a little bit off topic, but to follow up on what Paul said, I mean, I wish that the National Organic Program would reimpose those permissions for organic farmers to use antibiotics under the direction of a veterinarian on a targeted basis and go with double withholding times, because I think what it does is it puts farmers in a very difficult position of maybe withholding treatment for a little bit longer than they really should, as opposed to treating an animal quickly and knowing that that animal will still be part of the organic herd, although having a double withholding time. And I just think that was a step in the wrong direction for the organic program, in my opinion.
I agree, but I've learned to live with it over the years and accept the fact that if I need to treat an animal, the animal's health is my primary concern, not where the market, what the market's going to do with that animal in the end.
And I'm sure most farmers are like that too, but it would, I think, anyway. But,
care of the animals is the priority here, correct. So there was another question that I had heard come up in some of the work in preparing for this show, and that was a question, and Jen, I'm going to direct this one to you at first, about labeling of food products for consumer awareness in the marketplace, because I mean there are a lot of labels out there, and I'm wondering, are there kind of movements for awareness of consumers about whether or not these products have been, or antibiotics have been used in these food products?
Sure, it's a really good question, and it's something that we struggle with a little bit because there's not a lot of transparency around practices specifically for large operations and major companies that tend to contract to smaller farmers. So there are labels that consumers can look for. Certainly, if something's labeled organic, they know that it hasn't had any antibiotics at any point in its life. Food Alliance certified is the same. Then there's also certified humane, and then this Never Ever 3, which is something that I've just learned about more recently, which is no antibiotics, no growth promotants of any kind, and no animal byproducts. So another concern in animal agriculture is the use of animal byproducts in feed. So that's a another component of this certification. So I would say those 4 certifications, so again, Organic, Food Alliance, Certified Humane, and this NE3 or Never Ever 3, are labels that consumers can look for. There are certainly a lot of other animal products that have been raised without non-therapeutic use of antibiotics. And honestly, I think one of the best ways to know that is to know your farmer. So, when you're in the supermarket, you can't, you don't have that type of access to information. So you certainly need to rely on labels. But if you use your farmer's market or participate in a CSA or just happen to live near a farm that produces meat that you're interested in, talk to your farmer and ask them, what is their practice, and, make a decision that feels good for you. Additionally, if you don't see any of the products with the labels that I just mentioned at your supermarket, ask the supermarket manager and say, this is important to me. I want to keep shopping here. I want to buy my meat here, but I want to buy this type of meat. I want to know that the meat that I'm buying isn't going to contribute to antibiotic resistance in humans. And same thing at your restaurants or, your schools, wherever your kids go to school, or if you're in college or if you work in a hospital. Talk to the food service directors at your institutions and tell them this is important to you and this is what you want.
It might be worth saying here, CJ, that in Maine, since our farmers are not heavily involved in broiler production, big-time turkey production, or big-time swine production, that there's very little, if any, to my knowledge, use of non-therapeutic antibiotics in the feed and water for animals that are raised in Maine. Our dairy industry uses none of those antibiotics. And our layer industry, which has kind of a checkered past, but it's a significant economic factor in Maine. Those types of antibiotics are not used in the layer industry. They're primarily used in those segments of the industry that I mentioned. So I think if, as Jen says, if you can somehow buy local, know your local farmer, and as you said, organic is going to be antibiotic free from the get-go, I think you can be assured that you're going to have products that have not had those non-therapeutic antibiotics administered to them.
Okay, all right. And I just take a second here again to remind listeners that you are listening to Common Ground Radio, and today we are talking about antibiotic use in livestock production. Our phone lines are open if you're interested in calling with a question or comment, and that toll-free number is 1-866-625-9378. And back to that know your farmer piece, Paul, I wanted to ask you, as a farmer, I'm going to assume, but I'll ask if you have customers that are coming to you because they want to have their meat products antibiotic free in addition to your organic practices.
Yes, for sure. And in the vein of Know Your Farmer, we have a lot of people want to know exactly how we raise our animals. Even if they're certified organic, they want to know more than that. And so, yes, I think know your farmer and ask your farmer. And livestock farmers or vegetable farmers, they're all going to be happy to talk about what production practices they use and explain the circumstances of when they might have to use an antibiotic and what happens in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. And then, Dawn, I wanted to ask, is there proof about the antibiotics improving the feed efficiency and growth production? Has there been research behind that, do you know, or is that more anecdotal in a way? Or
no, I think there has been research done comparing some of these antibiotics, adding them to feed and then not adding them to feed. So I think there is a positive growth effect. But I think the concern over the years has been the constant administration of low levels of antibiotics and the ability of that to contribute to resistance. I mean, we know that every time an antibiotic is used, there's the possibility of resistance, whether it's used in the feed or whether it's used to treat, a tooth infection pneumonia or something like that, there's always going to be the possibility of resistance generated. But the criticism for agriculture is that we've been administering these low levels of antibiotics in large quantities for a long time. The evidence that this has created resistance infections that have then been passed on to people that have then had a treatment failure is very thin at this point. Those instances are extremely small. But theoretically, it's possible, and it has happened in a small number of cases. And as time goes on, perhaps it might become more prevalent. I think, as Jen would probably has alluded to, and you did in your introduction, that there are a couple of million people who acquire serious infections with resistant bacteria, and 23,000 die, according to a CDC website. But most of those are not, the vast majority of those are not from infections acquired through exposure to animal protein. They're because of hospital-acquired infections and so forth. But still, agriculture needs to step up and do our part to try to address this just extremely serious problem of antibiotic resistance, which potentially could bring an end to the antibiotic era if we don't get a better handle on it. So.
And how does that resistance build, I guess, within the bacteria?
Well, I think the way that it happens is that the more that antibiotics are used, the more that there are a certain number of bacteria that survive, and then those can become the dominant strain. And we've seen that in a couple of cases with the methicillin-resistant Staph aureus and vancomycin-resistant bacteria. And so when that happens, then these types of infections become much more prevalent and harder to treat in humans. And we have the same concerns in animals too, that we don't want to generate a resistant strain of bacteria that we're unable to treat. Mm-hmm. So,
and as part of it, my understanding is that bacteria reproduce rather rapidly. So
yeah, they
those
can.
Resistant traits could be passed along generation to generation.
Depending upon the bacteria, they can reproduce extremely rapidly. Yeah.
Okay.
And CJ, one other thing to add to that, if I can, certainly one of the things that's most important is preservation of life and human health. But there's such a strong and really conversation going on right now about the affordability of healthcare and how are we going to address healthcare overall in our country. And I just wanted to point out from a sort of cost-saving perspective that longer hospital stays to treat these bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, that leads to longer hospital stays, and it's estimated that costs somewhere around $21 billion every year. So there's a strong economic argument as well for addressing the growing antibiotic resistance.
Another thing to mention is that there are government agencies currently that have been for a number of years been tracking resistance trends in people, animals, and in food. So you have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which tracks samples from human labs for resistance. You have the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which collects samples to monitor trends in animals. And then the U.S. Food and Drug Administration monitors trends in retail meats. And this is done under the something called the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, or NARMS. And NARMS data is published every year. And the most recent report from the NARMS data is is somewhat positive with some bacteria, which seems to be showing that maybe some of the resistance trends are going down, but not for others. So it is being monitored by these 3 government agencies. And the other thing is, from the veterinary perspective, and I know the human physicians have taken a huge role in trying to get a handle on resistance in people, but veterinarians are required under their license to administer drugs and antibiotics under what are called judicious use principles. So this involves everything like the proper storage and disposal of outdated drugs, correct administration of antibiotics, that is, are they administered orally, subcutaneously, intramuscularly, in the udder in the case of dairy cows, proper dosages, proper concentrations, and they're also required to recommend to farmers that the proper meat and milk withholding times are followed, and advising farmers on the correct use of antibiotics. So as part of our veterinary license, we have to follow judicious use principles. So, there are controls and monitorings that are going on with respect to antibiotics.
Okay. And I'd take another moment here to remind listeners that you are listening to Common Ground Radio here on WERU, and we are discussing the use of antibiotics in livestock production and its effect on livestock as well as human health. The phone lines are open, and that number is 1-866-625-9378. I just had a clarifying question, and I think, Paul, I would ask you first here with having to go through the veterinarian. I'm wondering, can the farmer administer that antibiotic, or is it something that needs to be administered by a veterinarian?
We can administer them. We've been taught how to administer them. Usually it's a shot. Mm-hmm. But yes, the vet gives us the syringes and provides us with the syringes and provides us with the antibiotic and the education and you were mentioning the proper dosage, and another thing that our vet stresses, and my wife being a nurse practitioner stresses, is to complete the dose. That if it says use it for 10 days, to use it for 10 days. Don't stop at 5 days because you don't see any symptoms, but it's important to follow the directions, whatever they be. The other thing I wanted to add about organic production is that we don't rely strictly on antibiotics to maintain our animal's health. That our belief is a healthy animal will be resistant to problems on its own, and we do other things like herbal treatments and homeopathic treatments, and so that antibiotics are kind of the treatment of last resort for us rather than the first thing you do if you have a problem. And I think that's important for everybody to think about, that overuse of antibiotics in animals and in humans is a real problem.
Yeah, and I think that's good to point out, that a tool of kind of last resort there rather than the subtherapeutic that's getting fed out daily, twice a day. For sure there. Jen, I wanted to ask if just on the human health side, I just find this resistance piece really interesting. And are there any diseases or afflictions for humans that resistance is showing is building and is obvious? And I think I would afterwards ask Dawn the same question for livestock health.
So the one that we hear about the most is with regard specifically to staph infections, or Staphylococcus aureus, pardon my pronunciation there, that is resistant to methicillin, which is an antibiotic used both in humans and in animals. And that Don mentioned that the CDC reports around 23,000 deaths a year related to antibiotic resistance, and it's estimated that about 19,000 of those are from this the strand of staph bacteria that's resistant to methicillin.
Yeah, in animals, CJ, I worked with dairy farmers for a couple of decades when I was working for the state, and one of the practices that we would always recommend for dairy farmers is to dry treat their cows, all their cows, and basically what it involves is putting a tube of antibiotic in the udder at the time that cows are drying off. And there are a number of antibiotics that are approved, and that's done under either the treatment, because there could be an infection present at the time, or the prevention mode. And I always had a concern that over time that we might see resistance trends to that practice. But I was never really able to see it except in one instance on a dairy farmer that had been using a specific drug for many, many years. And when we did some bacterial cultures there on the farm, we found that a particular bacteria that his cows were infected with was resistant to that drug. Mm-hmm. So we made the recommendation that he change that practice. And so that was one area that I had some concern about, but I didn't really see a lot, if any, and here it is. Here again, it's an anecdotal report. It's something that I saw in the course of 25 years of working with dairy farmers. Another area where we really have seen it in veterinary medicine is not with antibiotics, but with treatment of parasites. And a lot of these parasites, worms that animals get, are becoming resistant to some of the drugs that we've been using to treat them. So we've had to be more targeted in our approach to parasite control. When I was in practice 25, 30 years ago, we used to recommend for people with sheep and goats that they worm their animals every year, all of them. Now we're recommending that they do that they actually examine each animal and use a technique to judge how anemic they are. It's called FAMACHA. But so using that technique, you can pick out the animals that actually have the worms that are causing anemia, and then just target those animals. So, we've had to adjust veterinary medicine. We've had to adjust our treatment practices with respect to parasite control. But I haven't seen, in my experience, a tremendous amount of resistance to antibiotics at this point.
Okay, and I know that I've read in agriculture and literature a lot of pest reports and things, and there's always recommendations of not using the same material over and over for those reasons, as well as kind of mixing them up. Yeah, definitely.
And CJ, can I just add one other thing?
Of course.
I just wanted to point out, I think it's interesting, Paul mentioned as an organic farmer that it doesn't come up for him very frequently that he has an animal that's sick that needs the use of antibiotics. I think that a lot of this conversation also goes back to what are our overall growing practices, and I'm sure that's something Paul can talk to much more intelligently than I can, but I think that it's important to look at, the overall health of animals and what the conditions are that they're being raised in that is leading to this desired use of non-therapeutic antibiotics, and that there's sort of a broader shift that is slowly happening, and that, in my opinion, needs to happen in animal agriculture overall. That is, and that this overuse of antibiotics is a symptom of that.
Okay, and that's interesting to hear, because when I think you had mentioned the increase in cost, or the $21 billion a year in extended health care coverage, that made me think of I would assume that the subtherapeutic use in livestock production was focused on the end result of economic gain, where it seems like the overuse now is affecting that economic gain, and materials need to be rotated around and approaches need to be changed.
One example that people bring up who are on both sides of this issue, either on the agriculture side or on the consumer side, that where people have been advocating for agriculture to reduce their use of antibiotics is Denmark, where they did, eliminate antibiotic use in feed and water, and back probably, I think it was 2000. And when you look at that data, I always the expression. Where you stand depends upon where you sit, I guess, and so you can kind of spin that data both ways, depending if you're an agricultural proponent or a consumer proponent, because yes, overall tonnage of antibiotics did go down in Denmark by a significant amount, but for a period of time that it took farmers to adjust to the new situation. There was more antibiotics used for treatment than there had been before, because animals were getting sick from diseases that had been held at bay for a while. So, how you use that data or whether that actually worked is like I said, is a matter of which side of the fence you're on. And they've also looked at resistance trends for bacteria from that data and seen it kind of both ways. But that is an experiment, really, that we could look at and possibly learn from to see what's going to happen, what may happen in this country if we go towards where we're going, which is not a total ban, but which will greatly restrict the availability of these drugs in the future, 3 years from now.
Okay. Well, we are getting into the final minutes of the show here. So I just wanted to put out there, we are talking about the use of antibiotics in livestock production. And as we get into the last few minutes, I just wanted to mention that Dawn and Jen will both be panelists at a public policy teach-in coming up shortly.
At the MOFCA Common Ground Fair on September 20th at 2 o'clock with Dr. Sears and Jen, and I think Alice Percy is the other panelist. She's an organic farmer from the Mid-Coast area. So, yeah, be the four of us. Should be interesting.
Okay, it looks like...
looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yes. So if people were interested in learning more, that seems like a very a good venue and a near date to learn a little bit more. We do have just a couple more minutes, and I was wondering if, Jen, for you, if people were really interested in more information, is there a way that they could get a hold of you or places where they could find that information that you would recommend?
Absolutely. People can always go to our website, which is noharm-uscanada.org. Again, that's noharm-uscanada.org. That's our North American website. I'm also always happy to answer questions myself via email, and you can reach me at Obadia, that's Obadia, at HCWH, healthcarewithoutharm.org.
Okay, Jen, and I'm realizing that I think I mispronounced your name at the beginning of the show, so I'll apologize for that.
That's fine.
It happens to me sometimes, too. Dawn, in your work for Extension?
Yep. You could reach me at Doc Hoenig, DOCHOENIG, VMD78 at gmail.com. I've found the most useful websites that I've found on this topic, and they're pretty, I would say, objective, I think, are the CDC website, and FDA has a really good website on antimicrobial resistance and how they're positioning themselves. And I think it's the data that everybody can get. And,
okay.
So, but yeah,
those are the good
I'd be
resources.
happy to talk with anybody by email.
And Paul, you'd be on the farm, I imagine.
Yes. Anybody can come to Happy Town Farm and talk anytime. And I would just say, if you want the best quality and to know where your meat comes from, buy organic and know your farmer.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we are very much at the end of the show here. I'd like to thank our listeners for tuning in and thank our guests here in the studio. And give also a thanks to Joel Mann for engineering the show. And thank you to everyone for listening to Common Ground Radio here on WERU-FM 89.9. Have a good day.